So I know it's been a really crazy week between open house and trying to get back to normal with Irma and all of the drama with the staff meetings and everything. So I really appreciate you taking time to come. So what I want to do is go over effective instruction, but particularly for kindergartners, practices that will really work with kinders. But they are only 5. So a lot of times when we think about higher order thinking processes and prompts and so forth to use in our classroom, it's very easy to think, oh, well, this works really great for middle school, or this would be really great for maybe 3rd grade, or I might get away with the 2nd, but how do you implement it, particularly with kindergarten students when they're so young? So I wanted to share a few of them. The 4 that I want to be based on, 3 of them is, straight out of Marzano. And then also constructivist perspectives. So these 4 areas are very easy areas for us to focus in to kindergarten instruction. Small group and cooperative learning, constructivist perspectives, note-taking and summarizing, yes, it works, and non-linguistic representations. Just a side note, I saved the best for last because to me, when they have such difficulty reading the words and the instructions, and we're still trying to teach them to read, how do we teach them to express their knowledge without using words and letters? And I think that's extremely vital for our age group. So, small group cooperative learning. So there's 5 key elements to that. Students interact face-to-face. So when you think about that, if they're interacting face-to-face, not across the room, they're actually working together on the same, thing together. Think about your centers. Is it really cooperative learning? Or are they working on the same work independently in different areas of the room? Or are they actually completing work together? So that's one thing that you really have to focus on about, are you having true cooperative learning experiences in the room? Positive interdependence, which means, do they need each other? Because in true cooperative learning, they have to be able to need one another to complete it, whether you assign roles or whether or not somebody may not have a role, but one person is responsible for the writing, whereas one person is responsible for the discussion. That, even the record keeping itself can be divided. And their support and guidance coming from, it should not come from you. It should come from each other. And collaborative skills are necessary. So is everyone involved? Are they providing feedback? Are they drawing conclusions as a group? Not necessarily group think, but are they able to discuss things with one another, solve the problems together without a lot of intervention from you? And members monitor group process and relationships. So they should be self-assessing their noise levels and their productivity. So we're going to get to that in just a moment about how we can help facilitate that. Because we group them by ability. Now, I was always the one until I started reading the Hoy and Hoy text where I got this particular information from. I've always grouped my kids based on ability. I was not a center. I had 4 other centers, and they would move in their group to each center. Now, it's almost embarrassing to admit now, but I would start my lowest achieving students at a center that I didn't mind if I had to pull them from, because I knew I was going to pull them first every day because I had to touch them every day. So they may start with something that was I deemed less necessary to them, and I pull them and I work with them. Well, I rerouted all that, and what happened was I got over what I thought was going to be a classroom management nightmare, honestly, to reroute that, and it actually saved me so much trouble. Because now each of my groups, I'm still not a center, but each of my groups have a different level together. In other words, I have higher achieving students, middle achieving students, and there's just a wide group. Now, I have animals that I call for them to come to me. What's great about that, and I can share it with you if you want, is I have a PowerPoint slide that shows where they're supposed to be, and it dings every 20 minutes. So when it dings, they automatically move. Point 1, I'm having a group. The rest of the room is moving. I don't have to finish my group or stop my group to tell other people to rotate. And when it's time for my group to come to me, I only have one person cleaning up in each one instead of a mad rush of everyone putting up one center. And it's really easier to manage that way. Also, they stay on task more because I always have a mamacita in the group. I always have a finger pointer that says, she's going to blow the whistle. You know, we're going to have to go to 0. So I always have, and then I have the one that has no idea what to do, but will be guided along. So actually my productivity in the centers have grown up just because I have all those multiple intelligence working together. So true ability grouping means that you're not supposed to name a group that they work with on ability. They should never seat and work with each other in any other context except with you. And that is ability grouping in purest form, which means at center time, they should only be together when with you. And they should change weekly. They should be completely fluid. Now, when you look at your Friday tests, that doesn't mean they're going to change weekly because you're going to have, there's chances are that same low child that was lower or higher on Friday is still going to be lower and higher on the next Friday. So one poor kid may not change very often with his other groups, but it also helps you more identify maybe he needs more one-on-one time along with his group if he's not moving through based on the skills. So the Magic 8, as I call it, everyone has heard of with Gardner, the 8 level of intelligences. And if you really know your students, that's a really great way to organize the people who are in your rotations. Because, like this quote says, any discipline, skill, or concept should be taught in several appropriate ways, but not 8 ways every time. You cannot try to help the musical student by playing Bach in the background while you're doing a hands-on manipulative math activity. It doesn't work that way. It has to be particularly that 2 or 3 at a time that you're focusing with that work together. So how else can you incorporate this? Well, you have a group for your rotations, and you know your kids to know that, okay, well, this kid is really good with spatial identification, and I really need them to be able to build these blocks and not throw them across the room. So maybe Johnny needs to be in there because if I have to pick another block, I'm going to go crazy because they're not learning, they're chasing blocks. So then next, you have a person who is, interpersonal, which means they are more able to help the people that are having trouble because that's their learning style. And then you may have someone who is more of an intrapersonal person. They're really good at self-assessment. If they can assess themselves and their work quality, then they can help the other one stay on task too. So it's one way that you give all of the students benefits of the different intelligences by putting them together and letting them work at their own pace and their own strengths together in the group. So, logical, mathematical, discerning logic, number patterns, linguistic, sounds, rhythms, and meanings, musical expression and appreciation of more rhythm. Rhythm not as in poetry rhythm, but also rhythm as in musical and beats and non-linguistic rhythm. However, these two obviously work really well together at times. Spatial, surroundings, the spatial world, where they fit in, visuals, and then interpersonal, we kind of touched on that. That's with other people, that's with themselves. Naturalists, which are really great to utilize in your science groups or any other time, obviously, they are able to understand categories and systems of the natural world and be able to keep things organized. I think we all know those obsessive compulsive students that just really have to have everything in order because that's how life is supposed to be. And then bodily and kinesthetic, which is really fun. That's they can control their body movements and handle objects skillfully, which means they're kindergartners, so every single one of them needs help in that. But we love them anyways. But, you know, some of them are better than others, so I'm assuming that those are the kinesthetic learners because they're better at it. Just I'm telling myself. So, before we move on to the next step, do anyone want to share anything that you guys do in centers that specifically addresses any of these or that you'd like to incorporate?
I guess I try and get them to be moving as much as possible. Otherwise, they get a little nutty. Trying to force them to sit and, you know, sit and be quiet is not age appropriate for 5-year-olds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you have some kids that really, you can even tell who needs it even more than they all need it, but you can tell the ones that that one kid in your room is running around. So okay, and everybody needs to get up now. Yeah. Because if they're done, we're all done.
Right.
Yeah. So, anything else?
I try and touch on different pieces, like have one center more focused with like spatial or one that's more interactive. One, you know, so that way they're all learning to learn a different way. Mm-hmm. And then if that's their strength, then they can kind of lead the others.
And that is really one of the goals of having centers in general. It's just being able to have however many rotations you have. I think we all have 4 besides ourselves. You have 4 different ways of covering pretty much the same weekly curriculum. You know, and so if you have 4 different ways to do it, then they touch it and apply it in 4 different ways. So we go to the constructivist perspectives. I actually completely revamped one of my centers because I had it called art. Because honestly, I had no other thing to call it. Honestly, just in my ignorance, I didn't know what else I was going to call it. I'd let them color or illustrate or build something. And I started thinking, actually, Marcia and I had a couple of conversations about back to the basics of education. And so it really is a constructivist perspective. Back when we were younger, that's what we had more of, more hands-on, more experience, more problem solving, more building, because without that, you can't do anything else. So now instead of calling it art, call it problem solving. And I try to give I've actually taught them the word constructivist. That means you are going to be a construction worker today. You are going to build and solve problems in some way or another. Some of the things that we can do in kindergarten, even though it can be thought of as higher level, grade level activities, is fuzzy, ill-structured problems. They don't need to know how to do it. That's great because at this stage of the year, they really can't understand or read the directions right now. You know, so if you have a fuzzy, ill-structured problem, that kind of really plays into kindergarten. Like, look, here are the letters, here are the words, you figure it out. And that's kind of how that plays in. Problem-based, so their job is to find the solution, and your job is to give them the resources and get out. Cognitive apprenticeships. This is the most important job of you as a teacher, particularly with hands-on centers and constructivism, is because just like it means, cognitive apprenticeships, they're almost like your little student teacher. You know, they model how you do it. So they need to be able to follow your direction as far as your example. In other words, your scaffolding and your example is how you're going to teach them to do it. They have to figure it out. So that just comes from observation, just watching them. Maybe you like slide a tool next to them, or, you know, kind of walk away and hopefully they just, Catholic scaffolding and support. And then you have to make sure that one way to really tie it in is, yes, you want them to do it independently at times, put them in a group. And then watch those multiple intelligences work in order, like how to figure something out. I mean, you've just put them in a group with Legos. And you have one kid who's counting blocks. Well, it has to be even. It has to be this many blocks on this side. And you have another kid that's saying, no, but a spaceship has this part that sticks out. You can observe it and you can see them working together to solve it and using their different strengths. So what I did is because I'm a firm believer that we're very lucky on our grade level, that we're all very highly effective teachers and we do our best. So what I tried to do when I prepared this was the things that we have all co-commiserated with about what we seem to need help with, or like, hey, do you have something on this? And we're sharing papers. So I tried to focus on that. So that's why your packet is so thick. Because I gave you a copy of the PowerPoint, but I also gave you a whole bunch of different resources that I found on each of those 4 strategies that hopefully you could, use as soon tomorrow, and then even adapt them to go later on in the year. So this is one that I use now. I will tell you from my personal experience, do not start with wooden blocks. Start with Legos, because wooden blocks are projectiles. Legos, I don't know if they just love them more so they won't throw them, or maybe it's the snapping. I don't know what it is. But I take the Ziploc bags and I number them and I put them in the center. And then they have to tell me which bag they picked. They have to count them, okay, and circle. So they're identifying a number, right? You see how many standards you have in here. Identification, obviously, right in your name. Count and identify a number, circle it. Then they have to write the number. Now, it's automatically a little differentiated for my students because here's the non-linguistic representation. You need to draw what you created. I need to know what this is supposed to be. So they're going to communicate that to me there. I have some students who will use their sounds and try very hard to write the word. And I tell them, if you can write the word, write it. But I really want to see your picture. And that way it takes the pressure off where their picture's really awesome. And then they'll try to write a letter. They're trying. But they're still building. They're still problem solving. They're recording. They're expressing themselves without words and expressing themselves with words when they're ready. Another sample, which is something that we all pretty much have, but we don't really think about it, I think, in a constructivist term. But you have different ways you can build on this, and this is a huge different set of short use stuff that's in your packet. There's room for error. There's your problem solving. Scaffolding guided letter blocks. This is your scaffolding, how your letters fit in. Okay, so you can have them start off by writing them. There's also a non-linguistic representation here to help figure out the word. And they can write the letters. Maybe for your other students, you could actually have them, just cut letters out and glue them in, or use letter tiles and build and record. But there's different ways that you can take this and differentiate it to the different people who are ready for the different steps based on the same constructivist perspective. So, note-taking and summarizing. Yes, is possible in kindergarten. Summarizing the process of distilling information down to its most salient points and to aid in understanding, memorizing, and learning the relevant material. They're taking notes in first grade. They need to at least know what that is. So what are we going to do? They're 5. We're trying to get them to learn A and D and little and E, right? So, first, I'm going to tell you 3 examples, and I'm going to show you one thing that I did, and actually worked out really well. I was very proud that they were able to do it perfectly. Opportunities in kindergarten. Story webs, closed reading, and graphic organizers. Anytime you mix graphic organizers, and there's a whole bunch of those in there, with non-linguistic and with linguistic, it activates all 3 aspects of their memory, and they are going to absorb that. So, this is one thing that I did. Now, we started with this sheet here, and we read it, and it was a nonfiction piece. So I got we did this whole group, so we got a really good aspect of it as far as, at first we talked about what is fiction versus nonfiction. That was a really big point that we already have to teach them. I already had to introduce that. Isolating words as a part of a sentence. So we actually pulled this up. I had it on the Elmo. And this is one of my higher performing students, but they were all extremely accurate. And I read it. We had them walked around, make sure they were using their finger and tracing the words so I could actually assess their ability to do that for a small group. And I said, guys, we're going to take notes on Johnny Appleseed. Okay, so the first thing we did was underline the word vegetarian. Okay, we practiced on how to isolate the sentence. We underlined compassionate. We underlined nurseries. Okay, they all did it. not a single one of them weren't able to underline the words. And I underlined it with an expo on the top. Then we talked about compassionate. So I read the sentence. Like, why does that mean he was compassionate? He was a compassionate man who gave the needy clothes and food. What makes him compassionate? So we took our notes, and I wrote the word compassionate, and I was like, give me another word for compassionate. And they came up with words: helpful, fair, nice, words that were, I think, very appropriate. I was extremely proud of them. And then I said, okay, so now we have our notes on compassionate, and it fits in with our democratic classroom and social studies. We're going to complete this. This is actually one of my ESL students. And we hung them up, and we called them our compassionate apples. And what they had to do was, I dictated the word. I said, compassionate, write a C. Compassionate, write an N. Compassionate, write an N. Right. By the way, it's 12 letters long. Okay. And it went a lot slower. Okay. But this child has difficulty writing. Her first language is Spanish. And sometimes she gets confused if it's a Spanish letter or an English letter. And look, I was extremely excited. And she wasn't the only one that did it. I mean, you can look at my compassion, they all did really good. In fact, at open house, I said, you notice their handwriting is much better than you see on their homework, and they all kind of laughed. I said, it's because we took the time. We focused one letter at a time. We read the sentence again, and then they had to give me, because it's a big word. They may never read that word again, but they'll know it again. And you can use this with any kind of amazing words we're studying in a week. They had to give me a non-linguistic picture. Should draw me a picture of what compassionate means. And here's a little child holding a flower. And then she tried to write letters for people in her family. She was giving flowers away. So it's just one of those things that, yes, this is note-taking. Isolating words, talking about what they are, giving us a meaning, or applying it to something else. So, non-linguistic, conversion of words to images. You're writing in your journal. I know you all do this already. They write in the journal, and you tell them, okay, well, show me how you did it. You can use pictures, you can use words, whatever you want to do to express it, just show it to me. We all know that just like when we see a baby turning pages in a book and making up stories, that is a precursor to writing, and expressing that is the most important. Have them use manipulatives, get them used to using learning tiles, and then make them make their own learning tiles. Combine them too, where they have to make their own non-linguistic. They have to make their own manipulatives so they can communicate with words, with hands-on. Role-playing, one of the things in one of the books I read that I thought was really, really cool is that it was a first grade class or second kindergarten. It was lower grade. And they were learning articles of clothing. They were learning jackets and pants and all that. So the teacher put on a fashion show where they had to work on, where they took turns. Everyone got to be a model. Everyone got to be an announcer. And they walked and they strutted down the classroom and they had to announce the things that they were wearing. And they said, but they knew what it was then. They could read those words now. They had a little map. They had a picture and they drew it all out. I thought that was really cute. Acting out vocabulary words, place your raise with them for the sight words. That's a great way. And just always use your graphic organizers. So here's one of your examples that's in here. I don't really care if they can write a people. I don't really care if they can write a places, but I want you to know what a places and a people is if that's what I'm teaching you. So you can have them draw it. That way you're still getting an accurate assessment, an authentic assessment for your students who can't. Right, there's my references. So I'm done. So everything that's in there, there's also some extra references for September. There's a whole month worth, I think, of non-linguistic homework assignments you can get using letters. So hopefully you'll find these.
Thank you, ma'am.